G'day everyone, it's Matt here from Mile Marker 66 Barbecue. We're a competition barbecue team. Andy and Mel have asked us to put together a bit of a video today, a bit of a guide on some barbecue as part of their keg room video series they've got going on at the moment during the lockdown. So what we've decided to cook today is some ribs. We picked ribs because ribs is a real classic barbecue cut to cook. I love cooking ribs. The other reason is also that I love sort of finger food and barbecue that you can sort of pick at, so ribs, wings, poppers and things like that. So I think ribs lend themselves to that really well. The other reason we went with ribs too is that it's a relatively cheap and accessible cut of meat to get compared to say some cuts of lamb or beef that can be quite pricey. And ribs are still available during the lockdown. There's a number of places you can pick them up. I happen to have some in the freezer, but places like Gilmore's, Bid Food, I know the new Bid Food Home, they'll deliver to your door, or their contactless delivery, and also some places like the Meat Box and Wholesale Meat Direct also sell. So it is a cut that's still very accessible at the moment, and it's still reasonably priced, probably looking somewhere around $18 to $20 a rack of ribs. And like I said, they are one of my favourite cuts to cook. So what we've got today here is a classic, what we call a St. Louis cut rack of ribs. So some of you may already be familiar, but a St. Louis cut is essentially a rack of spare ribs that's been squared off. You can see there that it looks quite square, quite straight on each side. So aesthetically they look a lot nicer than your spare rib cut. When it comes to rib preparation, another reason that cooking ribs is really good is that prepping ribs is really easy. There's not really a whole lot you need to do. You can see on the top here there is a little bit of surface fat. We're not even really going to worry about that at all. The only couple of things we're going to do when we're trimming is we're going to flip our rack of ribs over, and you'll see here on the bottom there's a very thin layer here called the membrane, and we like to take that off. It is a nice, not a need to, it is edible. It's not going to do you any harm if you leave it on, but I think it's preferential to take it off. I think texturally when it's cooked, it's not the nicest thing to eat. Alright, taking these off is very simple. If you haven't done it before, it can be a bit fiddly. In fact, even if you have done it before, it can be a bit of a pain sometimes. But all I like to do is just get a standard butter knife, and you can just sort of start to work it under the membrane there. I like to work it under until, lift it up a little bit, basically until I can get sort of a finger under there. Start to lift it up a bit. Once you get a bit of grip on it, you'll find getting a bit of handy towel stops it slipping out of your hand when you're pulling it off. You see it might take a couple of goes to get it all, but that's alright. Alright, so we've got all that membrane off, and that's about all we need to do. The only other thing I'm going to do is, you'll see just at this end here, there's a few little daggy bits, and the bones get a bit thin at the end here, so I'm just going to slice that little end bit off there. And really, in terms of preparing a rack of ribs for a trim, that's about all we need to do. Okay, so now that we've trimmed up our rack of ribs, the next thing we need to look at doing is getting some seasoning on them. So what we're going to do is just going to apply a rub. Today we're using the Rum&Q Rib Rocker rub. I really like that rub for two reasons. One, it's got a bit of pecan in it, and I really like pecan rubs. And two, it's got a great colour. You'll see it, it's really orange and bright, which is really looks really great on pork. You might be familiar with it, but some people do use a binder underneath your rub just to help as a bit of an adhesive to get the rub sticking to the meat, and mustard is a really common one with pork. So you can do that if that's your preference. We're not going to do that today. We're just going to use the natural moisture of the meat to let the rub adhere to it. The other thing with putting rubs is, my general rule of thumb is that I won't put a rub on any more than an hour away from when I'm going to put the protein on the barbecue. I know some people might like to rub the night before, or even a few hours before, to try and run a bit of a dry brining process. I don't like that idea because a lot of rubs are very salty, and all that's going to do is just draw extra moisture out of your meat, and you don't really want to do that. You want to keep that moisture in there. So I'd say an hour or even a little bit less from when you're going to put your meat on your barbecue. So when I'm applying rub, I just like to keep a bit of height, just so I can get, it's a funny thing actually, they call it rub, but you never rub, do you? You just sort of sprinkle it, but just a bit of height, bit of even, that height allows you to sort of let the rub go a bit more evenly over the meat, rather than, I think if you go a bit lower, it can get a bit heavy in places. Okay, so we've got our rub on the rib now, and I'd just like to go along at the end and just give it a bit of a, just a slight press down with the hand there, just to get that rub all sitting on there nicely. And basically we're going to leave that there now until our barbecue's ready and we're good to get the rack of ribs on. Okay, so it's been about an hour since we rubbed our rack of ribs, and in the meantime we've lit the barbecue and got it ready to go. Today I'm just cooking on the Pro Q, which is a great versatile bit of kit, but really you can use this method on any type of barbecue. It doesn't matter too much what you're using. Us in the barbecue world often speak in Fahrenheit, just by virtue of the fact that a lot of American recipes and videos use Fahrenheit, so we do tend to use that, but for those who use the Celsius scale, it's about 135 degrees. What we're going to do is we're going to go and go ahead and put the rack of ribs on, and we're not at the moment, for this first part of the cook, going to cook to any time or temperature. What we're going to do is we're going to cook until we're happy with A, the colour, and B, that the rub is set on the ribs, and we'll go into that a little bit further on when we look at it in a couple of hours time. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to get our rack of ribs and we're just going to place them on right in the middle there. And chuck the lid back on. Okay, so we've got those on now and we're going to let them sit for an hour and then we'll come back and see how they're tracking. Okay, so the ribs have been on for about an hour now and we're humming along at about 275. So we're just going to have a quick look and see how they're looking. Alright, so you'll see that the rub there is starting to set, which is pretty good. When I say set, what I mean is that it's not going to wash off when we go to wrap them. So you can either get your fingernail or something like your Insta thermometer, just give the rub a little bit of a scratch. You can see there it is starting to set, but there is a little bit still coming away there, so we're going to let these go for a little bit longer. But while I've got it open, I'm just going to give them a little spritz. We'll chuck the lid back on and we'll probably leave it, I'd say, for another hour or so. Okay, so the ribs have been on for 2 hours now and I've just taken them off. You can see here it's got a really nice colour on it and the rubs set quite well. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap them now, so that we're going to protect that colour. We don't want them to darken up anymore. So we wrap them up in tin foil. So the first thing we're going to do is just put down a little, couple of little things in the bottom of the tin foil here to wrap it up in. A little sprinkle of brown sugar. A little drizzle of honey. And a couple of knobs of butter there. We're going to take our ribs and we're going to turn them meat side down or bone side up and place them on that, and then we're going to do the same thing on the underside. So if you're trying to watch your weight or watch what you're eating during the shutdown, this probably isn't the most appealing thing for you, but it's going to make your ribs taste really good. Couple of knobs of butter. We're going to wrap in tin foil. So I'm double wrapping this in tin foil. Sometimes the bones can get a bit, can break through the tin foil, so we'll just double wrap it as just a bit of contingency really. You can see there we've got a bit of breakthrough already. And there we go. We're going to go chuck these back in the barbecue for about another hour. Okay, so the ribs have been on for about an hour wrapped and they're looking pretty good. You can see here that you're starting to get a bit of pullback from the bone, which is quite nice. And if we just give them a little probe, they're probing quite nicely. Pretty tender in there. I'm not really looking for a temperature for this. I'm just looking for how it's probing, and they look pretty good. If you are looking for a temperature, sort of around about that 205 degrees Fahrenheit range. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the ribs out of the tray here, and we're going to hold on to this tin foil, but we'll just discard the juice that's in here for now. Don't need that. And we'll look at slicing our ribs. So the way I like to slice them is I like to turn them upside down. That way I can just see the bones a little bit more easily, and I don't end up hitting them when I'm slicing them. Should do. Okay, now we've sliced them, we're going to turn them back over. We'll just chuck them back in the tin foil here. And what we're going to do is put a little sauce on them. So when we put sauce, we're just using a standard barbecue sauce today, just a Sucklebuster sauce, one of our favourites. These guys make great sauces and rubs. And I've heated it up in the just on the hob beforehand, just so I'm not putting cold sauce on warm meat. So you don't need to bring it to the boil or anything, just like to heat it up a little bit. We can get a silicone brush or a mop, whatever you prefer to use. I know you guys can't smell this, but it does smell very good. We get a nice coating of sauce in them there, and what we're going to do is we're going to put them back in the barbecue for like this for about 10 minutes, and that's just going to allow that sauce to set on the ribs there, and then we'll be ready for eating. Okay, so they've been in there for about 10 minutes and we're looking pretty good. You can see we've got some great colour here. The sauce is looking really good. We'll give one a try, eh? It's a nice and meaty rib there. They're pretty good. Oh. So you can see it's coming away from the bone really well, but it's not falling off the bone. So that's what I really like in a rib. It's tender, but you've still got a bit of texture there. So, man, that's really nice. You have to excuse the sauce around my face. Well, they're beautiful and tender. Nice and juicy. Very nice. Okay, that's it for today, people. Hopefully you enjoyed it and hopefully you learned something along the way as well. Thanks heaps to Andy and Mel for giving us the opportunity to do this. If you do have any questions about the ribs today or just anything about barbecue in general, you can get hold of us on Instagram at milemarker66 or through Facebook at milemarker66 barbecue. Other than that, we hope everyone's surviving all right in their bubbles, and remember, look after each other. Cheers.